2020 presidential cycle, the slogan, "Vote Blue no matter who," has been championed by establishment Democrats who point towards the risk of re-electing Trump as justification for what is effectively a coercive attack. These same individuals espouse the long-debunked narrative that Bernie supporters are responsible for Trump being in the White House. But with a little investigation, we can determine the truth of these types of narratives. Vote Blue no matter who had its roots before 2020. Having manifested in 2016 as a petition in response to another popular Democratic-related petition. In this case, the response may have done more damage to the 2016 Democratic nominee than previously realized. The push to support any candidate who may become the nominee, no matter who they were or what policy positions they claim to support, started as a response to the Bernie or Bust petition, and the lack of post-mortem on the 2016 presidential race helped these theories run unabated. The perpetuation of these fallacies has allowed more division to be sown on the left by consultants manipulating existing negative sentiment grown during the primary. The perpetuation of these fallacies has allowed more division to be sown on the left by consultants manipulating existing negative sentiment grown during the primary. For an example of an architect of centrist tactics such as these, look no further than to crossover consultants such as David Brock. We may not be able to associate it with him directly in 2016, but the case can easily be made in 2020. The "Vote Blue no matter who" slogan began to roll out shortly after a meeting coined as, I kid you not, the Stop Sanders Breakfast. When you reflect on this point in 2016, the Bernie or Bust movement was in full swing, and the establishment consultants knew, despite what some were saying on Twitter, that they needed Bernie supporters. Instead of actually taking the time to meet the needs of progressives around the country, a phrase was created to simplify and shame anyone who stood against a nominee who had the cards stacked unfairly in her favor. To be blunt, it was created to sheepdog progressives to vote for a candidate that supported corporate policies instead of progressive ones. The 2016 primary was ultimately a protest against that exact corruption, and fortunately, the DNC agreed. With the passing of the superdelegate reform in 2018, it was a small step, but still a step in the right direction, as it empowers local Democrats to grow their party and have their voices heard before party leaders cast a vote that could obscure thousands of hours of collective volunteer work. After having lost over 1,200 elected seats, the party was finally moving toward a future where the divisive ideas that had been losing Democrats their elections might finally be a thing of the past, and something only brought up to remind ourselves of what not to do if we want to win. Unfortunately, this thought process didn't end in 2016 or begin again organically. Like all things in politics, this was manufactured then and again now. The Stop Sanders Breakfast was reported by the New York Times in April of 2019. This article highlighted the high-level Democratic Party members and operatives in attendance. Among the notable attendees at the event were Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Pete Buttigieg, and consultant David Brock. Not only did they restart the "Vote Blue no matter who," but they gave new life to the misguided belief that it was the Bernie or Bust movement that cost Democrats the 2016 general election. This idea had mostly died out as it was easily disproved in 2017, and after the progressive gains in 2018 was beginning to be thought of as a dark moment in our party's history many would like to forget. Now, it is true that as early as 2017, comprehensive studies have been released showing that voters in crucial pivot counties voted for Obama twice, then Sanders during the primary, and then Trump or no vote in 2016. It should be said that the rate of the drop-off in 2016 was far less than the amount of Clinton supporters who refused to vote for Obama in 2008. Based on this statistic alone, it would be easy to make the misguided argument that Bernie or Bust voters were responsible for her loss. This single data point by itself does make the case that non-voting independents did in fact cost the Democrats the 2016 general election. However, the simple fact is, you can't make the entire conclusion based on a single data point. But consultants who want to manipulate voting blocks will make you think that we can. But at the end of the day, politics is, after all, a game of fractions. UMass professor Brian Schaffner released data disputing the Bernie bro culpability assertion. Schaffner noted that in an election this close, Any number of voting blocks could have proved decisive. Schaffner also suggested some voters were in Sanders' reach that were out of Clinton. The pool of eligible voters who chose not to vote is actually a very diverse group that represents many different demographics and areas. Brilliant Maps released startling findings in 2016 highlighting just how much of an issue this really is. The largest voting bloc at 46% now considers themselves independent. This represents voters' loss in faith with their party leaders and candidates. Voters are simply making a choice to not cast a vote or undervoting in key races. This did not vote group in 2016 presidential race vastly outnumbered all other votes. This means that this group is not a single voting bloc, and the problem exists in both major parties. If we look at this the way a business views its product sales, not only would this usually trigger a change in leadership, but it also sends a clear message that consumers are not interested in what either party is trying to sell them. What began as a vote blue no matter who unity call now has largely faded. Why? What's changed? The Sanders campaign is gaining momentum with the largest small dollar donation totals, millions of volunteers, and the rising poll numbers in key election states. And consequently, the former sheepdogging term has transformed into an alarm of panic among the elite and politicos. If you want to attack this problem directly, the number one thing you can do is stop saying these consultants' names at all and deny them the credit for any activity they may be able to profit from later. These consultants aren't brilliant strategists, but are simply opportunists preying on the grassroots for ideas that already have traction, and then charging candidates and parties for their overpriced and overrated services. And remember, these types of consultants have no game in Democrats winning because they get paid either way, and as they've been heard saying, business is good when Democrats are losing. In addition to that, make sure progressive candidates win by promoting positive interactions and growing your movement both locally and nationally. Ultimately, the true fault lies in the Democratic Party's leadership for putting up uninspiring candidates who push a broken status quo that has failed the vast majority of Americans. Let's be reasonable, though. Perpetuating a vote Democrat no matter who is not a flawed approach for Democratic leadership. After the primary, many are even required to do so, but they do need to recognize that they may no longer have independent support. It's important to also distinguish that this rallying cry during the primary is only the part that we see, while behind the scenes, it's accompanied by behavior that discourages critical volunteers, voters, and donors alike. They risk the very critical growth that the party needs to recover from the greatest losses in American political history. Democrats need to grow the party, and they do that by making independent voters who identify as progressives feel comfortable. Not just voting for the party, but taking party positions because they don't just need their votes, they need independents' time to volunteer, making calls, and knocking on doors. To get their time, it matters who the candidate is because these voters don't just vote blue. It matters who.